Catherine Howard's story begins not in a palace, but in the lesser halls of English nobility. Born sometime between 1521 and 1525, her birth did not stir the kingdom. She was a niece of Thomas Howard, the powerful Duke of Norfolk, and though noble, Catherine's early life was far from the royal grandeur that would later engulf and consume her. Catherine was sent to live in the household of Agnes Tilney, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. It was customary for noble children to be placed in such households for education and preparation for court life. Yet the environment at Lambeth was anything but disciplined. With little supervision, the residence became a hotbed of flirtations and adolescent freedoms, hardly the virtuous upbringing fit for a future queen. It was here that Catherine's relationships with two men, Henry Mannix and later Francis Dereham, would begin a pattern of youthful indiscretion that would haunt her all the way to the scaffold. These weren't scandalous affairs in the eyes of her teenage self, but to the future court of King Henry VIII, they would become treasonous. How did a girl from such a lax environment find herself wearing a queen's crown, and how did her past return to haunt her so devastatingly? The answer begins at the glittering heart of King Henry's court. By the time Catherine Howard entered court, King Henry VIII was a man changed, by age, by pain, and by politics. Gone was the handsome, athletic prince of earlier years. In his place stood an obese and volatile monarch, burdened by a festering leg wound, paranoia, and a desperate need to secure both love and legacy. Henry's fourth marriage to Anne of Cleves had been an embarrassment. The union, politically driven, was never consummated and quickly annulled. Catherine, with her youth, charm, and effervescent beauty, appeared as the perfect antidote. She was just 17. Henry was nearing 50, yet her presence seemed to invigorate the king briefly. To many, it seemed a romantic revival, a young, cheerful queen healing an aging monarch. But behind the scenes, power-hungry factions were at play. The Howard family, particularly the Duke of Norfolk, saw Catherine as a political tool. With her marriage to the king, the Howards were elevated and invested in maintaining the facade of perfection. But Catherine wasn't prepared for the treacherous currents of court life. She was young, inexperienced, and dangerously unaware of how closely every move, every whisper was watched. Once crowned, Catherine took her role as queen with vivacity. She delighted in fine clothes, music, and dance. Henry, smitten, called her his rose without a thorn. But beneath the silks and pearls lay secrets she could not shake. Her youthful indiscretions with Henry Mannix and Francis Dereham. Dereham, especially, posed a threat. Having served in the Dowager Duchess's household, he followed Catherine into court service. He allegedly boasted about their past, perhaps hoping to use it for favor or leverage. To protect herself, Catherine appointed him to a position in her household, an act that later would be twisted as an attempt to silence him. Rumors stirred and old acquaintances whispered. Enemies at court, sensing a weakness, began collecting evidence. But worse still, Catherine's growing closeness with a handsome courtier, Thomas Culpeper, would fan the flames of scandal into full treason. In the Tudor court, secrets rarely stayed buried. And in Catherine's case, the past was already clawing its way into the spotlight. Thomas Culpeper was everything Henry was not, young, charming, and fit. He held a favored position in the king's inner circle, and his familiarity with Catherine raised more than a few eyebrows. The extent of their relationship remains debated by historians. Were they lovers or simply emotionally entangled? Either way, their interactions were foolishly secretive, and in a court as treacherous as Henry's, secrecy was as good as guilt. Catherine allegedly arranged private, late-night meetings with Culpeper, assisted by her trusted lady-in-waiting, Lady Rochford. Whether those meetings were driven by love, lust, or political desperation, they crossed a dangerous line. Eventually, word of these secret encounters reached Archbishop Thomas Cranmer. Though cautious, Cranmer understood the stakes. If true, the Queen's behavior could be construed as adultery, a crime of high treason when committed by the wife of the king. The walls were closing in, evidence was mounting, and enemies were preparing to strike. All that remained was the moment of exposure. It was All Saints' Day, 1541. Henry and Catherine were at Hampton Court Palace. Cranmer placed a letter of accusation in the king's private pew at chapel. Upon reading it, Henry allegedly collapsed in shock and grief. His rose without a thorn had pricked him deeply. Catherine, oblivious at first, quickly realized her peril. She was confined to her rooms, interrogated, and eventually stripped of her household. Culpeper and Derham were arrested and tortured. Both implicated themselves and each other. Derham admitted a past intimacy, insisting it was before she became queen. Culpeper's case was worse. Letters between him and Catherine suggested emotional attachment, perhaps even planning a future together. One note read, "Yours as long as life endures." Catherine's attempts to deny or mitigate the charges failed. Her past and present had converged into a perfect storm. Her fate, like that of Boleyn before her, was sealed. The once celebrated Queen of England was now a prisoner of the crown. Catherine Howard was taken to Sion Abbey, a grim liminal space between freedom and the Tower. It was here that her mental state began to deteriorate. She reportedly screamed and sobbed for hours, begging to see the king, pleading for mercy. But Henry would not see her. The man who had once called her his jewel had turned cold. Whether out of heartbreak, rage, or political necessity, the king washed his hands of her. Catherine was transferred to the Tower of London in early 1542, the same fortress wherein Boleyn had met her 6 years prior. Inside those walls, she must have felt the crushing weight of inevitability. The rooms were familiar. Some were even the same used by Anne. Catherine was now entirely at the mercy of a court more interested in appearances than justice. Her youth offered no protection, her royal bloodline no sanctuary. Those close to her were not spared. Thomas Culpeper and Francis Derham were convicted of treason. Their sentences were brutal. Derham was hanged, drawn, and quartered, while Culpeper, thanks to prior royal favor, was granted the mercy of beheading. Lady Rochford, who facilitated the meetings, was also arrested, descending into madness during her imprisonment. The Tower grew silent. The sword was being sharpened. Unlike in Boleyn, Catherine was not tried in a public court. Instead, her fate was determined through an act of attainder, legislation passed by Parliament that declared her guilty without trial. It was a chilling exercise in Tudor justice, efficient, cruel, and unyielding. The act accused her of leading a most corrupt and carnal life and committing heinous offenses against the king. It declared that her dishonesty about her past and her later dalliances constituted high treason. The use of attainder ensured that there would be no chance for defense, no appeal to the king's mercy. Her death was now not a question of guilt. It was a matter of timing. Still, the execution was delayed. Perhaps Henry was hesitant to repeat history. Perhaps the memory of Anne's death still haunted him. But in the end, the pressure from his council and his own sense of betrayal outweighed all other considerations. On February 10th, 1542, the death warrant was signed. Catherine Howard would die 4 days later. The night before her execution, Catherine reportedly asked for the execution block to be brought to her room. She wished to rehearse laying her head upon it, determined to meet death with grace, not terror. Accounts describe her demeanor as calm, composed, some say unusually serene for one so young facing such an end. At only 18 or 19 years old, she had lived a lifetime of courtly rise and catastrophic fall. But in those final hours, she seemed to find a dignity that had eluded her in life. She dressed carefully that morning. Some said she wore black velvet. Others noted a gray gown with a fur-trimmed cloak. Either way, she stepped out of the Tower with poise, led by guards down the stone path to the scaffold on Tower Green. A small crowd gathered. The air was bitter, the sky heavy. Catherine looked pale, but composed. She made no long speech, only a brief prayer and a request for mercy on her soul. Then she knelt, and with a single stroke of the axe, the last queen ever beheaded in England was gone. Catherine's execution reverberated through England's corridors of power. The Howard family fell out of favor, their political ambitions crushed. Her cousin and Boleyn had once been the first queen to be executed. Catherine would be the last. Between them, they bracketed a bloody legacy of Henry VIII's marital reign. Henry himself withdrew from public life for a time. Some said he was haunted by Catherine's ghost. Others claimed he was unmoved, focusing instead on his next marriage, the sixth and final union with Catherine Parr. But the legacy of Catherine Howard lingered. For centuries, she was cast in simplistic terms: the silly girl, the wanton queen, or the foolish flirt. Rarely was she given the complexity or sympathy afforded to her male counterparts. Yet in modern times, historians have begun to re-evaluate her story. Was Catherine a manipulative temptress, or a victim of a predatory system? Was she guilty of treason, or simply youthful indiscretion? And what responsibility did Henry bear in turning a blind eye to her vulnerabilities? The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. Today, tourists walk the grounds of the Tower of London, unaware that they tread where queens have died. Guides sometimes tell the story of Catherine Howard. Some say her ghost still haunts the corridors, screaming for mercy, echoing the night she was arrested at Hampton Court. She has become a symbol, not just a tragic romance, but a system that devoured the women it elevated. Her story remains relevant not just because of its historical weight, but because it reminds us of how power and innocence, when mixed, can prove fatally combustible. Catherine Howard was the last queen to be beheaded in England, but her story is far more than a tragic headline in Tudor history. It is a cautionary tale of ambition, neglect, manipulation, and above all, the devastating price of being underestimated in a world built by and for kings. She was young, she was naive, but she was also brave. And on a cold February morning in 1542, she faced the axe with the quiet dignity of a queen, knowing that history would never forget the girl who dared to love in a house of lions. And so ends the story of Catherine Howard, young, unprepared, and ultimately devoured by the very court that crowned her queen. Her life was brief, her death brutal, and her legacy tangled in silence. But today, her voice echoes once more. If you found this journey through history as haunting and fascinating as we did, make sure to hit that like button. Share your thoughts and comments, and subscribe for more true historical mysteries, royal betrayals, and forgotten stories that shaped the world. Until next time, stay curious, stay questioning, and keep listening to the stories history tried to bury.